Alla Tulia Meldonia Ahara Mariese, and welcome, dear friends, to another episode of Tolkien Untangled. My name is Rainbow Dave, and in this episode we're going to continue with part 2 of the story of Feanor and the Silmarils. So in the last video I introduced you to the great elven smith Feanor, who forged the 3 great jewels, the Silmarils. However, despite Feanor's outrageous talent, his family life isn't going so well. His father, Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, has taken a second wife, Indis of the Vanyar, and together they've had 2 more sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin. Now, Feanor and his brothers do not get along, and a lot of this video is going to be about their rocky relationship. But there is another problem out there. Melkor, the Dark Lord of all evil, who has just been released from his long imprisonment. Now, Melkor may be feigning repentance for the meantime, but it is all an act. For the Dark Lord's malice has only grown, and during his imprisonment he has become obsessed with his old enemies, the elves. However, his eyes are particularly drawn to the Noldor, the mightiest of all the elven clans, and the easiest to corrupt. But what Melkor truly wants are the Silmarils of Feanor. However, it's not that easy, because Feanor covets these jewels more than anything else in Valinor, and he wears them proudly on his person as a symbol of his skill, so that everyone who saw the Silmarils was utterly awestruck by their beauty. And Feanor garnered immense praise for his work. However, Feanor grew more and more protective of these jewels, and eventually he became so reluctant to share them with anyone that he considered the Silmarils a part of his destiny. And he kind of willfully ignores the fact that the light inside them, the thing that makes them so precious, is not a light of his making. It is the light of the trees, the light of the Valar. So before long, Feanor began to fear for the Silmarils' safety, and everywhere he looked, he began to see potential threats. Now before long, he guarded the jewels so closely that he wouldn't let anyone but his immediate family see them. But even in time, this became not safe enough. And eventually it got to the point where Feanor could only be free from suspicion if the Silmarils were kept under constant lock and key. Now this suspicion and paranoia once again captured the eye of Melkor, who saw opportunity to sow discord amongst the Noldor. So at some point, whilst Feanor was obsessing over the Silmarils, Melkor came to him in secret. Now Feanor was instantly wary of Melkor's tricks, but he did listen, and Melkor came with a warning. He told Feanor that he'd learned troubling plans from the Valar. He cautioned Feanor that the gods of Valinor themselves were jealous of the Silmarils, and that one day they would try to take them from Feanor. Now, of course, Feanor believes Melkor without question, because Melkor's really just confirmed something that Feanor already believed to be fact. So Feanor gathered his 7 sons, and he secretly warned them to trust no one but each other. Not the elves, not the Maiar, and especially not the Valar. However, I should say that Feanor is not the sole focus of Melkor's deceit. You see, the Dark Lord's next target is another prince of the Noldor, Feanor's half-brother, Fingolfin. So Melkor filled Fingolfin's ears with half-truths about Feanor, and he warned him that Feanor's selfish ambition had swollen to such extremes that it now put Fingolfin and his family in harm's way. Now, Fingolfin's not an idiot, alright, and he's also very reluctant to trust Melkor. But he has seen enough with his own eyes to know that this much at least is true. Feanor could be a threat. So Fingolfin wanted to dismiss Melkor, but he knew he wasn't entirely lying, at least not about all of it. So time after time after time, Melkor returned to Fingolfin, but he was subtle in his machinations, and Melkor spoke only of Fingolfin's safety, and the safety of his sons, Fingon and Turgon, and his daughter Aredhel. Now, quick side note, without wanting to spoil anything or get too far ahead of ourselves, Tolkien does tell us that even in this very early point in the Silmarillion, that Melkor fears Turgon, the youngest son of Fingolfin. Now, Melkor doesn't know why he's afraid, no one does, but Melkor senses that eventually, from Turgon's line, shall come his doom. Anyway, that's just a little bit of foreshadowing. Back to Valinor, in the here and now, Melkor tells Fingolfin that he must be ready in case Feanor ever attacks, and Fingolfin must be ready to defend himself. So, Melkor offers to teach Fingolfin the art of forging weapons. But Fingolfin is truly reluctant to learn. You see, the elves have lived in Valinor for thousands of years, and in that time, as we know, they have crafted objects of exquisite complexity and beauty and all kinds of things, but no one has ever yet forged a weapon. Now, it's not like it's a rule of the Valar or anything, it's just that during the noontide of Valinor, in these days of peace, there has never been any need to make them. But Melkor promises Fingolfin he will instruct him in secret so that none of the Valar nor any of the other elves will ever need to know. Now, eventually Fingolfin accepts, and with Melkor's help he forged a sword that glittered like ice in the starlight. And the blade was called Ringil, but Fingolfin spoke of it to no one, for he believed that he alone had received Melkor's warning. But what he of course does not realize is that Melkor had said the exact same thing to Feanor, and Feanor had also secretly forged weapons and armor for himself and for his sons. Now finally, Melkor also visited Finwë's youngest son, Finarfin, and he hoped to corrupt Finarfin's heart too, but Finarfin had simply inherited too much of his mother's Vanyarin wisdom, and he had neither the ambition nor the temper to heed any of Melkor's warnings. Instead, Finarfin preached only peace and understanding amongst his people. And in fact, I always think Finarfin's a really interesting dude, because despite being one of the princes of the Noldor, he doesn't really seem to have that much in common with the rest of his people. Now obviously we know that he is only half Noldor because his mother Indis is one of the Vanya, but when Finarfin gets married, he actually takes a princess of the Teleri as his bride. Now just one more side note, this means of course, if you've been keeping track, that Finarfin's children, of whom the most famous is Galadriel, can trace their ancestry all the way back to all three of the elven clans of Valinor. Galadriel is half Telerin on her mother's side, and 1/4 Vanya, 1/4 Noldor on her father's side. And this might be a clue as to why Galadriel is such a powerful elf. Anyway, back to the actual story. Melkor's deceit of the Noldor does not end with Fingolfin and Finarfin. Now, I'm going to use Tolkien's own words here, because he puts it much better than I can. And he says that thus with lies and evil whisperings and false counsel, Melkor kindled the hearts of the Noldor to strife. Which basically means the Noldor are soon openly agitating against the Valar. And at the head of this rebellion is, of course, Feanor. And it's with Feanor that Melkor's final stroke of manipulation came. You see, Melkor approached Feanor feigning alarm. He claims that he's just discovered a plot conceived by Fingolfin to overthrow and usurp Finwë as the High King. Melkor says, as the firstborn son, at least of Indis and Finwë's union, Fingolfin believes that he has a claim to the throne, and he means to steal Fëanor's Silmarils in the process. So, unsurprisingly, I guess, Fëanor's reaction to this news is kind of the nuclear option, and he's so incensed and angry, and he's so ready to fight his half-brother that he really readily buys into Melkor's lies. And so, in Fëanor's mind, both Fingolfin and the Valar are now his enemies. And in private, his wife Nerdanel desperately tries to soothe her husband's wrath and to find a more peaceful solution. But by now, Feanor is beyond even Nerdanel's influence. But while Feanor is publicly criticizing the Valar and gathering rebels to his cause, his father Finwë can only watch in despair as his beloved son scorns the very beings that saved him from Melkor all those thousands of years ago. Because remember, Finwë was an emissary of the Valar once upon a time, and he doesn't want to rebel against them in the slightest, but in his mind, it's not that simple. His loyalties are split. On the one hand, Finwë has an obligation to his Noldorin subjects and a debt of gratitude to the Valar. But at the same time, he loves Feanor so much and feels like he just can't betray the son for whom his first love Miriel gave up her life. So, Finwë decides to hold a grand council, and he invites all the high-ranking lords and ladies of the Noldor to discuss these dire circumstances and hopefully arrive at some sort of peaceful compromise. Now, the first elf to arrive at this council is Finwë's second son, Fingolfin. In fact, Fingolfin deliberately arrives early so that he can have some uninterrupted words with his father. And in this little moment alone, Fingolfin begs Finwë to control his wayward son. He insists that at Finwë's behest, Feanor might listen, but Finwë won't do it. And I always think, in that moment, surely Fingolfin must really get the impression that his father just does not love him as much as he loves Feanor. And look, I don't want to blame everything that happens on Finwë, but I do have to say, I don't think he's the best father in the world. He totally enables all of Feanor's bad behavior, and he does seem to have very little time for his other two sons. Anyway, while they're talking about the unrest that has befallen their people, Feanor bursts through the door. But Feanor isn't dressed like everyone else. Feanor is decked out in full armor, and at his side he carried a sword. Now this is outrageous. Remember, weapons don't even officially exist in Valinor, but now this guy is bringing a weapon of war to a peaceful council. And the first thing that Feanor sees is Fingolfin whispering in Finwë's ear. And immediately, he believes every word that Melkor has spoken. So, without hesitation, he drew his sword and he turned it on his half-brother. And Feanor says to Fingolfin, in front of everyone, he says, "Get thee gone, and take thy due place." So I guess everyone's kind of staring uncomfortably at this point, but Fingolfin knows he has to give an answer. However, he also knows that as the second son, he will never truly get the support to challenge his brother, and he also knows that Finwë would never support him over Feanor. So Fingolfin just bows his head and walks away like a champion. But even this total submission still is not enough for Feanor. See, he followed Fingolfin to the door, and he put his sword upon Fingolfin's breast. And he said, "Try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and I will kill you," basically, is what he said. And to Fingolfin's credit, Fingolfin simply walks away to, I imagine, go and hang out with his much more relaxed brother, Finarfin. Now, although it may sound like Feanor has won the day here, he had in fact severely underestimated the will of the Valar. So it should probably go without saying that you can't just rebel against gods and expect there to be no consequences. And for a long while, the Valar have watched Fëanor spread his dissent. And they've allowed him to continue because, well, Eru Ilúvatar has imbued all of his children with free will, and they can't do anything about that. And to be fair, Fëanor hasn't actually hurt anyone yet. But when Fëanor brandished a weapon and publicly threatened the life of his own brother, the peace of Valinor was shattered, and the Valar are not happy about it. So, they demand judgment. Now, just like Melkor, Fëanor is now summoned to the Marchanaxar, the Ring of Doom. And in the eyes of the Valar, Fëanor is solely responsible for all this rabble-rousing, and they do judge him pretty harshly. However, when Galadriel and some of the other ringleaders are questioned, it becomes clear that Melkor had some significant role to play in all this. So, without hesitation, Tulkas the Champion, the physically strongest Valar and the one who chained up Melkor in the first place, he rose from his throne and he set out to probably beat up Melkor. But this isn't what happens. Tulkas never finds him. You see, Melkor has simply vanished, and there isn't a soul in all of Valinor who knows where he's gone. But despite Melkor's influence clearly being present, the Valar can't completely just forgive Fëanor. You know, it was by his will and no one else's that he forged weapons and used them against Fingolfin. And so, for his crimes, Fëanor is banished from the city of Tirion, and he's exiled up into the northern mountainous fortress of Formenos. Now, this may sound kind of harsh, but remember, Fëanor is an immortal, and he's only banished for 12 years, so 12 years is literally nothing when you're immortal. But anyway, Fëanor departed Tirion, and he went to live in Formenos, and he took all 7 of his sons with him. And he also took an immense collection of treasures and gems that he'd forged, and of course, the most precious of all these treasures are the 3 Silmarils, which he still kept locked away. Now, from the walls of Tirion, King Finwë watches his son wander off into banishment, and the sight of it broke his heart. Finwë believed that his son had been unfairly judged by the Valar and that he was undeserving of his fate. So, eventually, Finwë concluded that he loved his firstborn more than even his city, or more than even his people, and Finwë actually abdicates the high kingship of the Noldor in order to follow Fëanor into exile. So, in my mind, right, that is utterly crazy. I mean, I can't fathom what Finwë was even thinking, but it's what he does. Although, I have to say that right here there is a nice little detail, because despite the bizarrely atrocious behaviour of Fëanor and Finwë, neither of the Noldor's royal women follow their husbands into exile. You see, Indis of the Vanya, she chose to remain in Tirion with her sons and her grandchildren, and also to help her oldest son, Fingolfin, who has now had the responsibility thrust upon him of taking up the high kingship in his father's stead. And it's not just Indis, because Nerdanel, the wife of Fëanor, she too chooses to stay in Tirion. And I always think this is actually kind of nice. Even though Fëanor absolutely hated Indis, Nerdanel never had anything against her, and the 2 women were actually quite close friends. Anyway, Fëanor and Nerdanel's sons, as I've already said, also have to face a choice. Now, they could stay in Tirion with their mother and cousins, or they could follow their father to Formenos. And every single one of them chose to go with their father. And this is quite important to remember, right? You see, all the sons of Fëanor are insanely loyal to their father, even when it's clearly not a good idea to be. But anyway, for a while, Feanor lived a fairly humble life without the influence of Melkor or the judgment of the Valar. However, good times never really do last in this story, and Melkor's malice had not disappeared for good, and eventually his dark eye fell on Feanor once again. And in a cloud of shadow, Melkor appeared in Formenos. Now, Melkor spoke honeyed words, and he went straight back to his tactic of manipulation. But Feanor has actually learned from the past, and his trust is now entirely spent. But Melkor doesn't just do simple lies. He distorts the truth, and he told Feanor that all of his prophetic warnings from earlier had now indeed come to pass. And he's not completely wrong. Fingolfin had technically supplanted Feanor. He did now wear the crown of the High King. That's a fact. The Noldor now look to Fingolfin as their king, while Feanor languished in exile and obscurity. So, surprise, surprise, Feanor is all bitter. And when Melkor begins saying all these convincing things about how he's the only Valar worth following, for a moment, Feanor does, I don't want to say consider teaming up with the Dark Lord, but it does cross his mind that Melkor may have some of the answers. But then Melkor makes a huge mistake. He warned that only he could protect the Silmarils on Feanor's behalf. Now, at the very moment the Silmarils are mentioned, Feanor immediately becomes mistrustful, and he realizes Melkor's true intentions. And in this epic show of wrath, Feanor shuts the door in the face of the most powerful being in Arda. Now, I know I don't always have the most positive things to say about Feanor, but I will give him this. That is badass. But anyway, Melkor is forced out of Formenos, and he leaves furious, but empty-handed. Now, the Valar pursue Melkor north, where they expect he will flee back to his old lands of Middle-earth. But Melkor evades them. You see, in secret he doubled back all the way to the south. And whilst disguised as a dark cloud and a cold wind, he ventured beyond the limits of where even the Valar could see. In fact, Melkor didn't stop until he'd passed over the Pelori Mountains and escaped the boundaries of Valinor itself. And there, he discovered a forgotten wasteland called Avathar. And it was here, on this dark and abandoned plain, that Melkor found what he had come looking for. Now, among the cities of Aman, rumors and legends spoke of a monstrous evil that dwelt in the lands south of Valinor. The source of this evil is completely unknown even to Melkor himself, but the rumors intrigued him, and in a chasm beneath the earth, Melkor found her, the Gloom Weaver, a child of the void itself. Her name is Ungoliant. She is the Unlight, and she will darken Valinor forever. So on that foreboding note, I am going to finish this video, but do not fear, because next week we will be continuing the story, so make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already to ensure you don't miss that video. But because you wonderful people have all made it to the end of another video, I have another Tolkien Fun Fact to share with you all. So this week's fun fact is actually more of a trick question than a fact, but answer me this. In The Return of the King, and I'm talking about the book, who rides to Minas Tirith atop a white horse? Now, I feel like the obvious answer here is Gandalf, right? Or maybe Pippin. Oh, I don't know, maybe you guys weren't thinking that because I just said it's a trick question, so you were thinking something else. But the correct answer is actually Galadriel. You see, she rode to Aragorn's coronation, King Elisar's coronation, on a white horse. And she's the only character in Return of the King who Tolkien specifies as doing so. Well then what about Gandalf and Pippin, you might be asking? Well, although in the movie Shadowfax is played by a beautiful white stallion, in the books, Shadowfax isn't white at all. He is described as being silvery grey in daylight and almost invisible at night. So there you go. Anyway, dear friends, until next time, much love, stay groovy, and Navaya Melanin.